Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong says that the city-state is fully behind Japan's efforts to lead Asia's sustainability efforts. And Mr. Lee has attended the first Asia Zero Emission Community Leaders Joint Summit as part of his 4-day visit to Tokyo. He and his Japanese counterpart, Michiyo Ishida, discussed collaboration towards decarbonization and a transition to cleaner energy. CNA's Michiyo Ishida with more.
11 countries participated in the first Asia Zero Emission Community Leaders Joint Summit. It's Australia and all of ASEAN, except Myanmar. The aim is to achieve net zero emissions through various pathways. This as Asia emits 60% of the world's CO2 and is heavily dependent on coal-fired fuel. Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong supports the Japanese initiative.
If we look at the items under ASEC, it's basically these things again, talking about green hydrogen, talking about infrastructure for sustainable energy, talking about financing of sustainable energy. And these are all things which Singapore will need to look to if we are going to reach net zero in 2050. It's going to be a very big challenge. It's not at all a straightforward matter, and it is still work in progress. But we've set a goal, and we'll do our best to work towards it.
During the ASEAN-Japan Commemorative Summit on Sunday, leaders shared their vision on peace and prosperity. They also committed to abide by rule of law and international order and outlined implementation plans. Japan is seeking deeper engagement in the region's security. It's a year since Japanese Prime Minister Michiyo Ishida announced his defense strategy amid rising tension in the region to double Japan's defense spending to 2% of its GDP in 5 years. It's offering more defense hardware and technical support to ASEAN and offering people-to-people exchanges in this area.
The situation after the war for many decades was unusual because of the history of the war, but now, nearly 80 years after the end of the war, well, the situation has evolved and Japan has also changed, and Japan has a contribution to make. What can it do? Well, it can participate in the regional cooperation. For example, in the ASEAN Regional Forum, for example, in the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting plus discussions, which means ASEAN convening and bringing defense ministers from all over the region together. And there's no reason why in these forums Japan should not take an active role and contribute its views, because regional security is something which affects all of us.
Next year, Singapore takes over from Thailand as the coordinator for Japan-ASEAN dialogue relations. In 2026, Singapore and Japan celebrate 60 years of bilateral ties.
Politically, I think the relationship is good. I have had many exchanges with Prime Minister Kishida. In terms of economic exchanges, we are also prospering. Our trade is growing. Our investments in each other are growing. In fact, we've become Japan's biggest Asian investor, and Japan is Singapore's biggest Asian investor. And our investments in Japan have diversified. It's not just as traditionally in the real estate, hotels, properties, but also venture capital, also services, preschool. We've got presence here.
The two countries also share areas of interest. Prime Minister Lee named cross-border digital exchanges, setting up data centers that can serve the whole region rather than country by country for efficiency. Singapore and Japan also signed a memorandum of cooperation last week to establish a digital and green shipping corridor between both nations. Singapore will work with 6 Japanese ports on pilot projects for alternative fuels such as ammonia and hydrogen and adopt technologies to decarbonize port infrastructure. They're expected to be delivered by the 60th anniversary of bilateral ties. Michiyo Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.